to get started. I know I am. I'm very, very excited to have my friend Anne here tonight, and of course our special guest Cassidy and her mom Shannon. So here we go. We're going to talk about 5 surprising things that Cassidy learned, and her mom too, after she stopped sucking her thumb. And when Anne first proposed that we talk about this, I said, what 5 surprising things? And I have to tell you, I do this for a living and I was surprised. So let's go ahead and get started with the first one. First of all, I think a lot of parents, at least in my professional experience, will often come to us asking for help to help their child stop sucking their thumb, with the assumption that the one reason a child needs to stop sucking their thumb is just because it's a habit that, only little kids do, that kind of thing. But in reality, there are many changes that happen after a child stops sucking their thumb. And the first one has to do with learning to calm down. So Annie, can you tell us a little bit about that? What happened for Miss Cassidy especially? How did she learn different ways to calm down? And what does that have to do with thumb sucking?
Sure. Well, it's interesting. I think a lot of people come to me, like you said, because it's a habit or because it's making changes to their teeth, but they're worried that this is their child's only way to soothe themselves. And they're rightfully nervous to take away that habit because what will they do? And what I've learned over this time of helping about 300 kids to stop thumb and finger sucking is that children become stuck with thumb sucking, and many of them haven't learned a lot of the really wonderful ways of calming themselves beyond thumb sucking. So I propose it to kids as, let's explore some new parks. We all love going to a park. Park is great. And thumb sucking, in my analogy, is the first park you visit, one of your first parks. It's extremely relaxing. It feels awesome. But you want to move on and try other parks. And that's a lot of the work I do, is getting children, first of all, comfortable with the idea of exploring new things and then finding what works for each child.
I especially like that point because we also want to be sensitive to the fact that some kids come to us with the need to suck on something, a thumb, finger, sometimes it's clothes, and it may be because they had a history where they needed that extra calming. So can you tell me a little bit with Cassidy, and maybe you can have Cassidy jump in here too. What are some of the things that you taught her in terms of calming that we could substitute for thumb sucking?
Cassidy, can you think of some things that you learned to do with your mouth, to keep your mouth happy, that was different than using your thumb? Can you show us?
Oh, you're going to teach about that sort of stuff. Can you make sure you speak loudly?
I'm gonna do caves.
Okay. Cassie learned some special things to do with her tongue, and she's going to show us some exercises that she learned. You're going to show us some caves.
Okay.
Those are beautiful caves.
You're making a cave with your mouth.
Mm-hmm. And for some of the orofacial myologists watching, you might notice that Cassidy's had a tongue tie release. We can talk about that as well. Cassidy, were there things that you used for chewing that you really liked? Was that a new park for you? Can you show me some of your chewings?
This is my chewy necklace. It clips like this, and you can wear it. And when you need to chew something, you can chew this purple pouch. I have 3 of them.
You have 3 of them. Amazing.
That's fantastic. So that's one of the ways that she learns to calm down. We need to always provide a substitution for the thumb. What about in terms of sleep? That was another thing that I found as I was first getting trained in this really surprising, because doesn't sucking your thumb help you fall asleep? Why would it be one of our surprises that sleep actually gets better? Can you tell us a little bit more about that, Anne?
Sure, that is really surprising. But research shows that children, especially children who are sucking during the night, miss out on a lot of deep sleep. In fact, they come out of their deep sleep to suck. So when the sucking is eliminated, they go into deeper, more restful sleep. And I have seen this many times. I had a child this year whose parents were trying everything just to get her to sleep through the night. She stopped sucking her thumb and the problem was solved. It's amazing.
Wow. So the quality of the sleep is actually better?
The quality of the sleep is much better.
I was wondering if I can ask Shannon a question about that too. Shannon, is that something that you've noticed with the change in Cassidy? Did you have any concerns about sleep when she was still sucking her thumb, and did you notice any changes after?
Well, actually, one of the reasons we started seeing Anne because we were noticing how much she was just popping it in the middle of the night. She was even we had reasons that caused some regression, just like a natural quitting on her own. But then we were noticing that she was still popping it in throughout the night. She wasn't even falling asleep with it, but it would go in. But we've noticed just how much more energy she has first thing in the morning. We were telling Anne that it would take, a solid 45 minutes for her to be ready to be around people when she would wake up previously. And now, she sometimes still likes to read in bed, but it's not like a groggy hang out in my room thing. It's I'm up and I'm ready to be with people. So we've definitely seen a difference in that early morning energy too.
Mm-hmm. Melanie, I should make a little caveat there that when there is disruptive sleep, I'm definitely checking with an ear, nose, and throat doctor because sometimes there's thumb sucking with airway disturbances. So we're definitely ruling that out.
And how would that tie in, whether it was with Cassidy's situation or with another, when it comes to having tethered oral tissues, which we've talked a lot about on these events? But I know, Anne, that's a specialty of yours, and you mentioned that Cassidy had a tongue tie release. Can you talk a little bit about that relationship between energy, sleep, and the tethered oral tissues?
Sure. When the tongue is tethered low in the mouth and the person is sleeping, the tongue tends to drop back into the airway. And we can often find sleep disordered breathing. I'm not talking just about apnea, but we know that children should be quiet in sleep and in deep sleep. And so in Cassidy's case, she was being disrupted by thumb sucking, but also by the fact that she had a tethered oral tissue, which she's now had released. So we're seeing a double benefit for Cassidy now.
That's fantastic. I have a question that is probably surprising, but maybe not so surprising considering everything that we're going through right now with the pandemic. But what about germs?
What about germs? Germs is a big reason. It's one of my top reasons why I love to do this work. I've had the pleasure of doing this work through the COVID crisis, and it's even more motivating right now to keep children's hands out of their mouth. We're talking here about thumb and finger sucking, but I'm also working on fingernail biting, anything that's getting the hand to the mouth. And a lot of children with thumb and finger sucking habits develop hand, foot, and mouth disease, but they're also just exposing themselves to way more germs. And that's something that I explain everything to children very clearly on why they would want to stop thumb sucking. I want them to be a really responsible consumer, and they understand, and that's a big one for them usually.
I have a question for Shannon and Cassidy on that same note. So Cassidy, I have a question for you, sweetheart. What are you learning right now about washing your hands? Do you have to wash your hands a lot or not very much, or?
A lot.
A lot right now, right? Yeah, a lot to help keep us all healthy. So prior to working with Anne Shannon, were you, and prior to the pandemic, of course, I know you're a teacher, so you're focused on keeping all the kids healthy in the classroom. And I know hand washing is a part of the elementary school routine, but were you in particularly concerned about the fact that she was also sucking on her thumb and that relationship to germs, or how did you feel about it prior to the pandemic?
Truthfully, in our case, it wasn't happening very much during the day. But however, yes, it was definitely one of those things where we were probably extensively aware of how frequently she was washing her hands, but especially at night before she would go to bed, there was always a go scrub them down.
Yeah.
So that we knew that she was actually going to bed with clean hands. And I do know how grateful I was that it wasn't an issue during the day.
Yeah.
Many of the children I'm working with are sucking all through the day at school. And they're getting sick a lot.
Wait, I wanted to.
Tell me, Cassidy, what you wanted to say. Did you want to say something?
Did you want to say something? Okay, good.
I have this squishy thing to keep my hands happy.
Cassidy's still telling us about the new strategy she found for calming, and she had a lot of things to keep her hands happy.
So it keeps your hands busy so they don't go in your mouth? Show me what you can do with it. Whoa, it's really squishy.
And
That's so fun.
You can put your finger through it, and then all its things go through.
Like oh my goodness, that's fantastic. See? I love it. I love it.
Beyond the hands and the mouth, in terms of ways to calm, I'm often talking to children about deep belly breathing and many other body strategies that they can use, and also ways to handle anger. I mean, that's all. It's a very comprehensive approach.
I love that. You know, I think what we're going to do, because I want to talk to you a little bit more, Anne, and I know it's getting really close to Cassidy's bedtime, is I think we're going to go ahead and say goodnight to Cassidy and her mom. And thank you both for being here. It's so helpful to, especially Shannon, to have your viewpoint. I know there are a lot of moms tuning in tonight. So thank you so much. And Anne and I will take it from here.
Okay, bye.
Good night.
Bye, darling.
Cassidy.
Bye. She loves you.
Bye, Shannon. Bye, Cassidy.
All righty. Here we go. Well, okay. So just to recap, Cassie's so cute. I just loved it.
Right.
But just to recap, first of all, we're talking about 5 surprising things that happened when Cassidy stopped sucking her thumb. But this is true for many, many children that you work with. They learn new ways to calm, which is always a fear of the parents that if we take away the thumb, like they're going to be so upset. How are they going to learn to calm down? So, and I totally understand that. So new ways to calm. Surprisingly, the kids learn to have a better quality of sleep, better sleep in general, because they're not waking up to get back to sleep with their thumb.
Right.
And then the third one was, and I thought Shannon, Cassidy's mom, focused on this just beautifully. She immediately said the amount of energy that Cassidy has now, because she's getting better sleep. She's getting more oxygen, really, right? Yeah. And
Totally.
oxygen is everything.
I would say to that, in terms of more energy, it's on many levels. It's more energy from having better sleep. But we also know that when you suck your thumb, you're releasing a lot of neurotransmitter. And many of these children are actually feeling kind of dopey a lot of the time. And so when you take away, when they move on from the thumb, the neurotransmitters settle, and really these kids kind of come out. They feel more balanced, less sleepy, more ready to engage, whether it's in imaginative play or talking. One child I worked with was dancing in her classroom when she stopped sucking her thumb. It was amazing.
I love that. I love that. So often I see kids kind of zone out when they're sucking their thumb. And if they're doing that in the classroom, they're not really attending.
Yeah. And the neurotransmitter response is really clear. We understand why they feel that way.
Yeah. Well, and finally, our fourth one that we talked about with Cassidy and Shannon were just the fact that now we don't have to be as worried about germs because we're trying so hard to teach all of us not to be touching our face, but especially kids not to be chewing their nails, sucking on their thumb, etc., and give them some other options that they can chew on that we can easily wash and keep sanitized. But I had one last surprising one that I wanted to share with everybody, Anne, and I was wondering if you could take a minute and just talk a little bit about the developmental path and facial development that we want these children to be on from infancy on into the elementary school years. So I know we really want kids to stop sucking their thumb by what age, ideally?
Well, it's earlier than we expect, really.
Yeah.
Thumb sucking is normal in the early stages of the first year. But really, we know that discriminative mouthing, coming to chew things and use the whole mouth, happens pretty early within the first year. So we would like children to move on to that like they should. But if they do get stuck, the changes to the palatal bones, the bones that form the floor of the nose, are happening quickly. And so if we can get children to stop. Sorry.
I'm going to pause for 1 second because I know we have a lot of parents listening. I've got my throat scope here. I'm just going to show everybody my palate as you're talking. Okay, go ahead.
So we know that thumb sucking is moving those bones in the palate. And if you look at Melanie's face, the roof of the mouth is the floor of the nose. So we're actually taking a palate that wants to be wide and arched and making it narrow, more steeple-like. And that's happening with thumb sucking. When we look at thumb suckers, we can often see the shape of the little thumb right in the palate. So
it's just like Play-Doh.
Really, we
would molded right up there.
We would like them to move on within the first year. But the approach that I take, that I'm talking about with Cassidy, a comprehensive approach, is most useful from 3.5 on.
And that's where most kids, I think most parents call after about age 3 and saying, kind of thought she'd grow out of this and I can't get her to stop. Can you give me some ideas? And that's why I think it's so helpful to have these 5 surprising facts, because there are so many benefits for kids to stop thumb sucking. When I have one last question around that, and then we'll wind it up for tonight, and we'll take a few questions from the audience as well. But with the roof of the mouth, as that thumb pushes up there, we also know that impacts the way the child develops what we call a mature swallow pattern, which we've talked about in other videos. So we won't go into that in depth right now. But when they're pushing up and we're starting to create more of that high palatal vault, what's happening to the rest of the facial bones in response to that, and the muscles?
Making a huge change to the rest of the facial bones, talking about changes to the maxilla, the upper jaw, to the relationship between the maxilla and the mandible. Most common changes in the dentition are an open bite or an overjet, where the front teeth are coming out more, or a posterior crossbite. So we're seeing changes in relationship of the upper jaw to the lower jaw. And then we see major changes to the facial muscles, because this face has not engaged in chewing, in heavy, strong chewing. Instead, it's more flaccid, it's engaged in sucking. So there is a lot of change.
That's fantastic. And one of the things I always want to keep in mind, and we talked about it with Mary Billings recently for Holland Healthcare, is that the bones and the muscles, they work collaboratively, especially as our face is growing. So if we push too hard on one bone, it's going to shift everything else and essentially torque things. And the muscles begin to follow And that's where they really need to come and see someone like you, a certified orofacial myologist. And just in closing, can you just explain to everyone what the art of orofacial myology is all about, and how long you've been doing this?
Sure. The art of orofacial myology, for me, is related to speech pathology. I'm a speech pathologist. I could also be a dental hygienist and have this special certification in orofacial myology. We're looking at the muscles of the face, particularly the lips, tongue, and jaw and palate, and making sure that the muscles of the face are developing normally.
Fantastic.
I want to say, in conclusion, though, about thumb sucking, something we just maybe didn't touch on quite enough is that children feel incredibly empowered.
Yeah.
It's often the hardest thing that a child's had to do in their life to overcome a habit like that. And I just take real joy in seeing how empowered and strong they feel by doing something that they thought was going to be hard. And in fact, it was fun, and they feel so strong.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because it brings back the memory of when I first met you. I think it was like 18 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I was at your office and we were talking about thumb sucking, and you pulled out this gigantic 3-ring binder, and it's nothing but children, the kids you've treated, going like this with this big, I'm so proud of myself grin on their face, right? That they did it. Yeah. So once they stop, they get to be in that book, and you're so proud of that book too.
I'm so proud of them being able to say I can.
Being able to say I can. I love that.